So by the way, this is the end of season 1. So this is the last episode of our season 1 of this entire AI Unlock series, where we're diving into the Python that is necessary for AI. In season 2, we're going to be talking about data science for AI. And the reason for that is because if we're going to be reinventing AI from scratch, we really need to understand how to manipulate data, how to make predictions in data, because the essence behind AI is prediction. So AI at the end of the day is just a complicated mathematical statistical function that makes predictions. ChatGPT is just a math function that makes predictions. You input a piece of data and you get a prediction in the form of a token or text, basically. So at the end of the day, we want to master prediction. We want to master statistics. We want to master data manipulation. And that's what data science is about, and that's what this season 2 is going to be about. So this is the last episode on our Python series, and we'll soon be starting with our season 2, and we're going to be diving deep into pandas, matplotlib, and statistics and just data science in general, for just the tools that we're going to be needing for AI, right? Because data science is just its own field, right? Just how Python is its own field, data science is also its own field. So we just want to dive into the tools that we're going to personally be needing for our goal on reinventing AI to understand AI. Alright, so before we talk about APIs, I want you guys to go to this page, and I want you to just read through the documentation. The OpenAI in general has a really good documentation. Specifically the text generation, I suggest you guys take a look at that. It's really helpful. Again, these things are updating all the time, so who knows, this video might actually end up being outdated in the next month. Who knows, because AI is just constantly moving. I am going to be solving that by creating a community. I might create a Discord community. We'll see. That way I can, create content within the community that is constantly being updated, as this entire AI landscape is just constantly, rapidly evolving. So, but for now, just enjoy the video. So, this is the OpenAI developer platform. I suggest that you go and create an account. Once you create an account, follow the steps, go straight to dashboard. Once you go to dashboard, you want to go to API keys. Here, you'll click on create new secret key. Again, we'll get to what an API key is and what an API is in general, but just follow these steps, create that new key, and then you should get like this really long key, basically. You want to copy it and you want to paste it somewhere. Paste it in some kind of text file, and yeah, just paste it somewhere temporarily. Do not expose it to anybody. You are gonna have to be paying for this. You might have to go on usage, implement your credit card or debit card, because you are gonna be charged by tokens basically. But first, let's talk about what an API is. So we talked about last time how we don't want to be able to code everything from scratch, right? We are reinventing AI. We are going to be coding AI from scratch. We're going to be, reinventing and We're going to be coding out a lot of machine learning algorithms from scratch, including a transformer from scratch. ChatGPT is constructed by the transformer architecture. For those of you who don't know, that's why it's called GPT, Generative Pre-trained Transformer. So it's a pre-trained transformer. It's a transformer. The transformer is a model. It's an architecture, and it's basically just a really complicated mathematical function. That's all it is, and we already know what a function is, right? It's just a machine. You input something and you get something out of it. So it's a function that is already trained on a whole bunch of text data. That's why it's called pre-trained. And it's generative because it generates new text. That's what it's generating. That's what it's predicting, in essence. So that's why it's called GPT, Generative Pre-trained Transformer. And we are going to be coding out a transformer from scratch, only using Python or NumPy. Now, it's obviously not going to be the same as ChatGPT, because you need millions of dollars and lots of computing power and lots of data. But it is going to be a good exercise for us to actually understand how ChatGPT works, how these transformer models work, and the mathematics behind it, so that we can actually go and read research papers and be up to date with these things and not be mediocre AI engineers, right? So that's the idea. That's the end goal. We don't want to be mediocre AI engineers. We want to be competent AI engineers. This is me reminding myself this as well. I want to become a really competent AI engineer. So this is an exercise. This is an exercise for me as well. So me documenting this is actually me applying the Feynman technique, right? When the best way to test that you know something is by teaching it to others, and that's exactly what I'm doing here. And I suggest you do the same. Once you don't just consume these videos, apply it and go teach it to somebody else, right? That way we're adding value to the world as we're learning. We talked about videos, like during this series, about libraries. I did not spell that correctly. Okay, yeah, libraries. So we talked about how there's a lot of code that you can write, right? So let's suppose that I want to analyze a data set, right? An Excel spreadsheet, right? So I want to do that in Python though. So there are a lot of algorithms that I can code out to conduct a data analysis on my Excel spreadsheet. You're going to do a lot of coding in order to actually be able to do that. And it's probably not going to be very helpful if you code all of that from scratch. So what you want to do is you want to borrow already existing Python algorithms or Python code that already has that entire thing coded out, right? That already, some group of developers over time already coded out all the tools you need in order for data visualization, and all you have to do is call those tools for you to use in Python. That's called a library. And there's actually a very special library in Python in order for you to conduct data visualizations, known as matplotlib. There's also another library for you to manipulate tabular data, and it's called pandas, right? That's a pandas library. So these libraries are coded out in Python. Like, you can borrow the functionality from these libraries in Python without you having to actually code out those algorithms from scratch, right? It would be very, very tedious for you to have to, like, every single time you want to do data analysis, to code those algorithms from scratch, right? You're going to spend hours and hours and hours coding those algorithms from scratch and not do data analysis at all, right? It's going to take you forever to actually get to the data analysis part. So you want to be able to reuse code that has already. You don't want to reinvent the tool, basically, right? If I'm going to build a house, right, and I don't want to have to, like, reinvent the hammer, right? You just go to Walmart and buy a hammer to build a house, right? So that's the point. That's what libraries are. Libraries are just tools that I don't have to reinvent. It's good for learning. Like, if I want to reinvent the pandas library, I could do that as a coding exercise, but it's not practical in the real world. So that's what's important to know about libraries. And libraries are open sourced. So the pandas library is open sourced, and it's something that you can run on your local machine, on your computer, right? So that's something you have to understand about libraries. You can run it typically, most libraries, you can run it on your local if you have a good computer, and they're open source, meaning that they're free. Most of them are free, at least. And and they're very practical, and you can immediately use them. You only need one single Python command to run it, which is like import pandas, for example. Import matplotlib, for example. That's all you have to do. And, well, I mean, you have to first install it into your machine, right? You probably have to run some pip commands, right? Pip is just a package manager in Python that you run on your what do you call it? Your PowerShell to actually install it in your environment. But yeah, that's not what we're talking about today. Either way, we're going to be talking about matplotlib and pandas in season 2 of our series. So hopefully you understand what a library is. A library is just this huge toolbox, right? And within that toolbox, so in the pandas library, that's why it's called a library, right? It's literally a library. It's like, imagine this huge bag of tools, right? Call the pandas bag of tools. And within that bag of tools, you want to be able to extract the tools that you need, right? Pandas has a bunch of tools that you can get, and you only need certain tools. There are a bunch of tools that Pandas has. So Pandas has the read CSV tool, right? That allows you to read a CSV file, or read an Excel file, right? There's a bunch of tools in Pandas. Same thing in Matplotlib, and same thing in other libraries. So there's a specific way, a very useful and easy way for you to extract the tools that you need in a bag of tools, in a library. But what is the difference? What does that have to do with an API? So an API is very similar to a library, but it's not a library. An API stands for an application programming interface. And yes, I totally spelled that incorrectly because I do not know how to spell. Okay, application programming interface. Sounds fancy, right? Now, what's an application programming interface? Well, here's the thing. Libraries, like I said before, they are open sourced. And you can typically run them on your local. APIs, on the other hand, are applications. Like, we already know what an application is. I'm not going to get into the formalities of an application. Like, you know, Facebook is a web application. You know, you got YouTube is a web application, right? You got well, what's a famous mobile app that Instagram is an application, right? We already know what an application is. What is something that these applications have in common? Well, they're owned by corporations or owned by companies, big companies. Some applications are owned by small companies. But at the end of the day, they're owned by a centralized company, a centralized organization. That's what an application is. But here's the thing. Companies sometimes like to make extra money, right? And the way they make extra money is by lending out a hand, by saying, hey, I'm not gonna make my entire code base or my entire application open sourced, right? So Instagram or like Facebook, they don't have their entire code out there exposed to the world. Otherwise, it would become, in essence, an open source application, right? It wouldn't make any sense. No, they have all of their code base is locked, it's secret, it's closed source. But they do share certain functionalities of their application. So they don't expose their entire application, but they do share certain functionality, certain tools of their application. In exchange for what? In exchange for money, right? So OpenAI is a company, and we all know OpenAI because of a very famous tool that I'm very sure you guys already know about, ChatGPT, right? So ChatGPT, probably the tool of 21st century, I guess, I don't know. Very popular tool, came out 2 years ago, I think, and it just took the world, like, it just surprised everyone. So OpenAI, we all know, is the owner of ChatGPT. They also like to share their functionality, not their entire code base, but certain parts of their functionality of ChatGPT or of other tools that they also have. So when a company or when an application or organization shares certain parts of their general application, they call that, they first have to, in order for them to share it with you, they have to create an interface, right? They need to create some kind of programming interface that allows you, the developer, to connect with the functionality of those parts of the application that the company is going to be allowing you to use. So they're going to be creating a programming interface, right, of their application. That's why it's called an application programming interface. It allows you to connect with those functionalities. So what stuff what stuff that is OpenAI sharing with us? They're sharing us a whole bunch of functionalities. They also have tools for generating images, for audio, for assistance, for text. Today we're going to be just a short introduction. Again, this is a documentation that I suggest you guys go and read. We're just going to be talking about the text generation. And in order to do that, you need an API key. And remember, because they're charging you, then you don't want to share that API key with anybody. Otherwise, people are going to use up your tokens. And they're going to like use up your money, and that's not a good thing. And they could hack you, and it's just not a good idea to expose your API key. So really be careful with that. This API key is going to allow you to connect with the OpenAI API, so you can get the functionality that OpenAI is giving you access to. Of course, go deep. You can go yourself to the website, read more about it, read about the different tiers, the different payment plans. I'm not going to dive into that. Today I just want to introduce you what an API is. Now you know what an API is. And that is very different to a library, right? Because in a library, most of them are free and they can run on your local. An API, it cannot run on your local necessarily. I mean, imagine running a trillion parameter model. It's going to be pretty heavy to run on your local, right? So it's not the same as running pandas or the matplotlib library on your local, which is nothing, or even running a simple linear regression model, than to running a generative pre-trained trillion parameter transform a model on your local, right? That's unless you have the computing resources to do that, it's just not practical, right? So what we're doing is we're borrowing from OpenAI's computing resources. We're not using our own computer resources. We're using OpenAI's computer resources. That's why they're charging us, right? So that's the difference between an API and a library. So, and the way we connect with an API, we essentially have to get the secret key. This is generally for almost all APIs. And once you get the key, you can just follow the documentation. Every single company has like their own documentation for connecting with their API. So it's not like a set in stone thing for everyone. There's different ways of doing it depending on the company. Just read the documentation, right? You read the documentation, you get your secret key. And here's the thing. Once you get that key, I already told you guys to put it somewhere temporarily. We're going to launch a Jupyter Notebook, right? You already know how to launch it. If you've been watching this here, you should already know how to launch your Jupyter Lab or Jupyter Notebook, whatever it is that you use. You can even use Jupyter Notebook on Visual Studio Code. So that's also a recommendation of mine, that you install Visual Studio Code. It's very simple to install. You just go to Visual Studio, you go over here, you install it for either Mac or Linux or Windows, whatever you're using, and that's it. You just download for Windows, install it, and once you install it, you should have something like this. So once you see something like this, this is your Visual Studio Code. You want to go to File, you want to go to Open Folder, and you want to open up wherever your Jupyter, wherever you're working on, like whatever directory you're working in, that's where you want to open up. So right here, you select the folder, you open it, and you should get something like this. So I'm in my folder called Inventing AI, and as you can see, these are this is where I'm hosting my Jupyter notebooks. So once you do that, and the reason why we're doing that is so that we can create something known as a .env file. I might be mistaken here, someone just correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think you were able to create a .env file here. At least I wasn't able to. So you want to use Visual Studio Code for that. Either way, you should still have Visual Studio Code installed. So this is a good exercise for you to have it installed, because eventually you will be needing it. Once you're in that folder, you want to be able to right-click, press New File, and just type in .env. Once you type in .env, you're going to get some empty. I don't want to show my .env because it's going to expose my API key. Let's see if I can maybe create a new folder just to show you guys. So you're going to get something like this. What you want to do is you want to type in OpenAI API key, right? It's just a variable. You guys already know what a variable is. And you type in equals, and you want to copy and paste that API key. So whatever your API key is, right, you want to paste it in here like this. You don't want to add quotations to it. Don't add quotations. This is not a string, right? You just want to paste it as it is right here. Once you do that, you want to press on File. You want to press Save All. Once you do that, so I don't need this because I already have my .env over here with my API key. I'm not going to show you guys because I don't want to expose it, and you shouldn't too. So the reason why we're doing that is so that we can secure our API key in our environment, right? Because we don't want this API key to be part of our code, right? We don't want to hard code our API key. We don't want to be like, oh yeah, I'm going to put my OpenAI API key right here in my Jupyter notebook. No, that's not a good practice. It's not good to put it in your notebook, and it's not good to put it in your Python file. It's not good to put it in your code in general. We want to be able to put it in a secure environment so that when we do upload our code base to GitHub, I'll talk about what GitHub is in a sec, your API key is not going to be in GitHub, right? It's going to be stored in your local, which is a good thing. You don't want it exposed anywhere. So the code base is going to be referencing that API key, but it's not going to be actually be in the repository, if that makes sense. So there's a lot of details that you could do your own research in, but generally you don't want to hard code it in. I guess you could hard code it in right now like this if you want, just for practicing, if you're not going to do anything serious with it. Either way, it's still a good exercise for you guys to get accustomed for when you do actually start building LLM applications down the line. But either way, this is just a short introduction to OpenAI API, and hopefully you follow the steps, and hopefully all of that made sense to you. Once you do that, how do we actually access the API key from our code then? Well, there are a couple libraries that we want to use. Number one, we want to import OS, right? Once we have OS, and by the way, if you get an error whenever you're importing something, just take that error, copy and paste it into ChatGPT or Google it, and it's most likely going to be the case that you probably don't have that library installed. And you just have to look for the command depending on what you're using, if you're using Windows or Linux. So for example, if I'm trying to import the OpenAI library, right? So from OpenAI, import the OpenAI SDK toolkit, the OpenAI SDK, right? If I'm importing this library, I first need to have it installed. So I already have it installed, so I'm not gonna get an error. But if most of you probably don't have it installed, so you want to type in OpenAI pip install or something like that, and this is it. This is the command that you want to be able to run on your Jupyter Notebook. If you're running this on Jupyter Notebook, you might want to put an exclamation mark on it, because for some reason you have to do that in Jupyter Notebook. If you're running it in your command line, then you don't have to put that in the thing. But as soon as you run it, it's going to be installed and you're good to go. But yeah, so we want to import OS. We'll talk about this guy. We want to import OpenAI as well, but we'll talk about him later. So once you import those guys, we also want to import another library called load something. I forgot what it's called, but I think it's from .env import what was it, load .env. Let me just double check. I don't have any of this memorized. You shouldn't either. That's what Google is for, right? Load.env. Yeah. Okay, that should be it. So this guy right here is going to allow us to load our environment variables from our directory if we have any. So if we launch this guy, this is a method, by the way. We already talked about methods last time. If we launch this guy, if we run this guy, it's going to either return true or it's going to return false. If it returns false, it's probably because you didn't. It's probably because you're not in the right directory. It's probably because you didn't set up the .env file correctly, and you probably want to go like you probably want to fix that, right? You want to go rewind the video and see what you did wrong. But if you did everything correctly, if you're in the right directory, I'm in the Inventing AI directory. This Jupyter Notebook is also running in the Inventing AI directory. If all is good, then it should return true. So if I go to, right here, this is the .env file, right? And these are all the Jupyter Notebooks that I'm running. Yeah. So hopefully you did that correctly, and yeah. So this is the Jupyter Notebook that I'm running right now. As you can see, this is the time. That's the directory that I'm in. Either way, if you run this guy right here, it should return true if you have properly set up the .env file in the working directory. If it returns false, you just gotta like play around with it until it returns true. Otherwise, then just hard code it into Jupyter Notebook. But you shouldn't do that. You want to get accustomed to this because it's more secure. Now that this method right here was able to identify our environment variables, right, or API keys, now we want to actually store it in a variable. So let's call this variable, let's see. Oh yeah, so OS right here allow us to access our operating system. So OS allows us to access our operating system. It's useful for navigating our directories. And this guy right over here is how we're going to be using it. So remember, this is a library. So this library is a bag of what? Tools, right? So we're going to access a specific tool from this library, and this tool is going to help us access our API key. So this guy loads our environment variables. This guy is going to, specifically this guy, getEnv, is going to help us retrieve that API key without actually exposing the API key. So how do we retrieve that API key? Well, we retrieve the API key through the variable that we named it earlier. If you remember, in the .env file, you typed in OpenAI API key equals whatever your API key was. We're going to be referencing it by the name of the variable, if that makes sense. So OpenAI API key. So do not run this code cell. I literally just made a mistake earlier where I ran this code cell and my entire API key was exposed. Don't run this code cell if you're sharing your screen or recording or whatever, because it's going to literally return the API key. So don't do that. But this thing right here is literally returning the API key. What we want to do is we want to store it in a variable. Let's just call it API for now. There we go. So right here, this variable contains the API key. So beautiful. Now you understand that. Now, how do we actually connect with OpenAI? With the OpenAI toolkit, right? Well, we already imported OpenAI. So this is the toolkit. That's how we reference the toolkit. How do we access it? Well, we pass the API key. There's a parameter called literally API key, and we have to pass in our key. We actually have to pass it in directly, not as a variable. I just stored it in a variable just to show you guys, but we have to pass it in directly like this into this parameter. So remember, a function, this is technically a function in a way, and you have a parameter and you're passing in something into that function, kind of. But yeah, this right here is just the toolkit, the OpenAI toolkit that we're connecting to using the OpenAI API key, and then that's it. And then you just connect to it, and there you go. We've connected to OpenAI. Now we can hack OpenAI. No, I'm just kidding. Now we can start using the tools that OpenAI well, allows us to use. So this entire thing, great. We essentially are going to store this connection. So this is our connection. We're going to store this connection inside another variable called client. Why call it client? You can call it whatever you want, but we're just going to call it client because we are the client. Not client as in like business client, like client. So, okay, context in computer science, your computer is called the client, and a server is just another computer that is out there that you're connecting to. So you are the client, or your computer specifically, not you, your computer, your local is the client, and this local computer is connecting to a server. We're connecting specifically to the OpenAI server. So that's why we're calling it client, but we can call it whatever you want. The point is that we can now use this variable and use, remember, now that we're connected to OpenAI, now OpenAI is kind of working as a library of sorts, right? This is technically a library. Now that we're connected to this library via the OpenAI API key, we're not just connected to the library. Now we can actually use the tools from that library and not running those tools on our local machine, otherwise our machine will explode. Not really, but it's going to collapse because we don't have the computing resources, but it's going to be using the computing resources from OpenAI and rendering the results on our local, if that makes sense. So we can now go into the bag of tools of OpenAI and use whatever tool that we need from OpenAI. The tool that I'm going to be showing you guys today, just as a short introduction, but you can read further in the documentation. I encourage you to do that. The tools that we're going to be using, that I'm going to show you right now, is the chat completions. So we're going to go inside a tool within a tool within a tool within a tool. So the tool that we're going to be going into is chat, and we're going to be going into the completions tool. I cannot talk today. The completions tool, and then we're going to go into the create tool because we're going to create a chat's completions. What the heck is that? Well, honestly, I don't even know. All we're doing is we're just trying to input, we're trying to access the functionality of ChatGPT. We're basically just inputting a set of text, a set of tokens, we'll talk about that, and it's going to spit back out the output or another set of tokens. So it's just going to respond back to us, like if we were using ChatGPT. So let me just clarify this. So in this create tool, or method, inside this, we're going to be passing certain parameters. A parameter that we're going to be passing in is the model parameter. Within this parameter, we're going to access a specific model from OpenAI. Turns out that OpenAI has a lot of models, a bunch of models, right? It's not just one model. It's not like ChatGPT is a single model. ChatGPT is just the name of the application. But the application ChatGPT is is being run on many models. Like you can choose to run a more complicated reasoning model called the O3 model, for example, the O4 mini model. There's also the GPT-4o model. There's many models that ChatGPT has, depending on the tier that you're using, right? Or the payment plan. So you just want to, so if you're starting off, you might want to just run GPT 4.1 or GPT-4o. I'm going to use GPT-4o for now. If that doesn't work for you, then just use GPT 4.1. So I do have to correct myself actually. Oh yeah, GPT 4o. Okay, I keep confusing GPT 04 with 4o, but yeah, there's a huge difference. So once you pass the modeling, great. We want to use the model, right? How do we use the model? Well, it turns out there's another parameter called the messages parameter. And in this message parameter, this is actually a list. We talked about lists. And if you've been following this Python series and doing the exercises I've assigned to you and following through the examples and not just consuming the video, you remember that a list stores data. There's a whole bunch of different kinds of data, right? There's text data, there's integers, there's floats, there's booleans. You should already know what that stuff is. So if I have a list, I have elements in my list. And my list has location or addresses that we call indexes. So in the first element of my list, the location of my first element of the list is called 0. So index 0. So this element right here is located at index 0. This element right here is located at index 1. This one right here is located at index 2. This one at index 3, and so on and so forth. So if I want to access an element from my list, I want to, so let's just call this a list. Oh shoot. Okay, that did not go well. Yeah, let's just call it a list. Run that. So if I want to access, let's say, the first element in my list, then I use these bracket thingies. I don't know what those are called. Are they called brackets? I think they are called brackets, right? These are called curly brackets, and then these should be called brackets. Okay, good. My vocabulary is terrible. But anyways, we want to use these brackets, and you want to input the number. So this number that we're inputting in is the index. So if I input 0, it's going to access what? It's going to access the first element. And there you go, you've accessed the first element. If I input 3, it's going to access this element right here. So 0, 1, 2, 3. So that's a basic recap of lists. We already talked about lists in previous videos, so I recommend that you check that out. Anyways, so messages is a list, but it's a list containing what? It's a list containing dictionaries. And we already talked about what dictionaries are as well. So dictionaries are defined by curly brackets. And the elements in a dictionary are actually elements called key value pairs. So an element in a dictionary would be something like this. Fruits, apple. My creativity has run out. Oh, drinks, water. So this, how many elements are in this dictionary? Two elements in this dictionary. We have this element and we have this element. But this element is defined by a key and a value. So this is the key, and with this key you're able to access the value in this dictionary. With this key you're able to access the value in this dictionary. In fact, you can actually your value can actually be a list in itself. You can be creative with this, and your value can literally be a list in itself. So if I access this entire element using this key, I'll be able to access this entire value or this entire list, and then I can index further that list. So all of this we're going to be seeing in season 2 of our series, where we're going to be, manipulating data structures, manipulating dictionaries and Python lists, using the pandas library to manipulate data frames or tabular data. We'll talk about that another time. The point is, we've already touched a little bit upon dictionaries, and in this message parameters we have 2 types of dictionaries. So in the first dictionary, we have our system prompt, and in this other dictionary we have our user prompt. So what is the difference? So a system prompt is you telling the AI, hey, this is your identity from now on. You are a helpful assistant and you're going to help me do my homework, right? Or you're going to help me learn French, right? You're giving an identity to the AI. And the second prompt is the user prompt. This prompt is just you being you, right? You're just talking to the AI. You're saying, hey, how are you? Or hey, can you help me with this question? That's it. So if you're on ChatGPT, you know that little inbox, that little chat window where you type in the stuff in ChatGPT, that chat window right there is you accessing the user prompt. So you're just prompting in, that's a prompt that's coming from you, the user, and you're inputting that into the API, and then you're getting a response back, right? So the system prompt is going to be defined, again, because this is a dictionary, it's going to be a key value pair. So the key is going to be called role, and the role is going to be, whoops. Okay, I did not mean to do that. So the role is going to be called system, and the role over here in this dictionary is going to be called user. Beautiful. Now, in this dictionary, we have one element. We're going to create a second element within this dictionary called content, because we need to define the content for this system prompt. And the content is going to be, hey, you are a helpful assistant. Is that how you spell assistant? My spelling is so bad. I'm so sorry, guys. Assistant. Yes, okay, that is how you spell assistant. Hey, you are a helpful assistant, right? That's the prompt, right? You're prompting the model to do something for you, or to be something. And here, the second element of this dictionary is actually going to be our message to the AI, and we're going to get a response back. So we type in content and say, hi, I'm Tony. And there you go. And then literally, if you press enter, you're going to create your first chat completions. And of course, if this is your first time, or if this is not your first time, or if you have 10 years of experience, you're always going to get an error like this. Let's see. Let's see, what error did we get? Error, invalid error for content, expected a string, what did I put in? Expected a string, let's see, messages, role, system, content. There must be a typo somewhere. Let's see. Yeah, a good way to debug this is by actually being organized. So as you can see, I am not that organized. So let's see. Yeah, okay. Here's the mistake. Content. Yeah, okay. That's beautiful. I forgot to put an N right here. That's just great. But yeah, let me just organize it like this. There we go. Your first chat completions. Anyway, you don't have to do what I just did right here. I just simply formatted it. You could literally leave it as one line if you want. The reason I got an error is because I forgot to. There's a typo. I said content instead of content, but it happens. So this is your first chat completions. Beautiful. Now, what the heck is even this? What the heck is this? What is this? This is stuff that you don't need to know about. All you care about right now is, well, actually, there are a couple of things that you should care about. So right here is telling you the number of tokens. In this chat completions, it's telling you the model that it's using. But right now, just for this video, we're going to focus on this guy right here, which is the content. Here is the response that we got from the AI. Hi, Tony, how can I assist you today? That's the response that we got from our GPT-4o model. That is what we care about. How can we access that specific part of the content? So there's a couple of ways that we can do that. Well, first of all, in order to access it, we have to turn this entire completions into its own variable. Yes, I know. You're probably tired tired of variables by now, but it is what it is. We can call this variable completion, right? This is our completion. Great, so that we can actually access, the completion right here. So we have to index this completion so that we can retrieve this guy over here. The way we do that is, so if we just take a look at this completion, it can look a bit confusing, but it starts off with chat completion, and within chat completion we have something called choices. So we have this element over here, but we also have choices over here, and within choices we have a list, and within that list we have another thing called choice, and within that we have something called, we have a parameter called message, containing something called chat completion message, containing something else called content. So that's a lot of stuff that we gotta play around with. So let's play around with this and see if we can get what we want. So let's see, what happens if we do choices, dot choices? What do we get? Okay, good, cool. So we get dot choices. We get a list containing stuff. Now, this looks like this is an element in the list and this is an element in the list, but actually this entire thing is a single element. So don't get fooled, because I actually made the mistake thinking that each of these were elements in a ginormous list, but they weren't. This entire thing is an element. So because this entire thing is an element, then we want to index this entire element by 0. There we go. So it's the same thing. We just got rid of the brackets, so it's no longer a list anymore. And now we just want to index it normally. So we'll talk about all of this in our season 2 series. But yeah. Let's see. Now our goal is to get to content. So let's go with, let's see. I think we're supposed to go with, if I remember correctly, is it message? Yes, it is message. And now we just do dot content, I believe. There we go, dot content. So dot message and then dot content, and that's how you can actually access the message. Great. So we can actually put this into its own variable. We call it response. And now we have access to the message. Hi Tony, how can I assist you today? And then we can do a whole bunch of things with this message. We could literally pass this message to another LLM and get another response. And we can create a chain of LLMs or a chain of agents that can work together and talk to each other. This is the foundation of agentic AI. All this buzzwords, NAN, Make.com, all these tools that are out there, they're very helpful. They're good for creating workflows, for visualizing stuff, for creating, architectures, cognitive architectures, and maybe for creating simple services that you can sell to businesses. But if you want to create a rigorous production-ready application, then you need to understand how to create these agentic systems, these workflows, from scratch using Python only, or TypeScript, or whatever language you're using. Because at the end of the day, all these overwhelming tools that are out there, they're really just boiling down to a single programming language like Python and the API, or an open source model. And yes, there exist open source models. OpenAI is not the only giant out there. There's also Anthropic, and there's also actual open source models out there like Llama 3, for example. Meta has a bunch of open source models that you can use, and the way you can connect to those models are very different. And you can do your own research on it. Things are just constantly updating. You want to take on a different mentality, right? You don't want to be like the guy who's consuming 20 videos. No, you want to take a different mentality, because you need to understand this space is constantly changing. So you're never going to learn everything, right? You even saw me making mistakes here sometimes. So things are always going to constantly be changing. And this method, by accessing the response, is actually a very old method. It's called the chat completions method. Turns out that OpenAI, if you go over here to text generation, OpenAI now has a new method to access the response of a model, the text response of a model. It's now called the client.responses.create, or the responses API, instead of the chat completions API. So this is actually another method, if we copy and paste this over here, to actually access. It's actually a lot easier, this method, by the way. It's a lot more practical. I wanted to show you this approach though. This is the traditional approach to access the OpenAI API. The reason why I want to show you this is because a lot of companies out there still use this method, So if you're looking at open source code, you're gonna, or maybe even old tutorials out there, you're gonna see this method of connecting to the API very. It's gonna be very common because it's the one that like the first way to actually connect to the OpenAI API. It's the more traditional way. It's the most common way, and this way is actually very new. So this is why I wanted to show you guys. I wanted to show you this first. But it's also good to learn the new method. And the new method, I mean, it's actually very simple. You just type in client, right? You connect to the client, same way, right? The same way you connect to the client. You, excuse me. You initialize a client, right? You access, instead of using chat completions create, you just use responses.create. And then you just pass the model, same thing, you pass the model. But instead of using messages, you actually just type in input. And you just input whatever message that you want to tell the model. And you just, you access the response, and then you just type in .output text and you get the response back. So in this case, let's run this guy just so I can show you guys. So if I run this, response is going to be all of this, but all we have to do is output text, and there you go, and you get your output text. We input write a 1-sentence bedtime story about a unicorn, and we get an output text, right? So it's a lot easier, a lot more cleaner, if that makes sense. But I just recommend that you guys go over the documentation and actually get started, actually, just tinker around with it. But yeah, this is going to be the last episode on our Python for AI series. So now you should know all the tools that you need for Python for AI. So you know about variables, you know about lists, dictionaries, functions, libraries. Now you know how to connect to the OpenAI API, the most important API out there. Now you're ready for season 2. And in season 2, we're going to be diving deep into data science. And the reason for that is because, so data, so let me explain this. We first talked about the tool. We need a tool to manipulate data. And from this data, we want to create a prediction. So the tool that we spent our entire season 1 on is Python. Python is a tool that allows us to do what? To manipulate data. Now that we know how to, use Python, now we can go deeper into data manipulation. And why do we want to do that? So that we can eventually master the art of prediction. Why do we want to master the art of prediction? Because AI at the end of the day is just prediction. AI is just a function, a very complicated function. Like ChatGPT, for example, is just a very complicated function where you input something into it and you get something out of it, right? It's just a complicated function. So ChatGPT is just a very complicated mathematical statistical function that makes predictions. You input a text and you get an output that's also a text, right? We literally inputted this text and we got this output, right? And the inner workings of ChatGPT, that's what we're going to be diving deeper into in, I believe, season 3 maybe. But season 2, we have to first master data science, or not everything in data science, but just the essential tools that we're going to be needing for machine learning. So that's the plan, and hopefully you enjoyed this video. By the way, these are also called tokens. So this entire message is basically split into something known as tokens. And tokens are just like, I guess you could call it the atomic units of a string of text. So it's a string of letters. It could be a period, it could be a comma, it could be a space, it could be 2 letters. There are different ways to tokenize a string. So you can count how many tokens you're inputting into the model and how many tokens you're getting out. And that's going to be important for actually calculating the cost of your API usage. So just be cautious about that, because you are being charged for this, by the way. The OpenAI API key, it's not free. But yeah. So with that being said, I hope you enjoyed this video. Please tinker around with it. That concludes season 1. look out for season 2. And when I mean look out, it's probably going to be out next week. And yeah, like, I hope you enjoyed. If you enjoyed this, subscribe, like the video, share it with someone. And yeah, just enjoy, because at All Mind, we're going to be talking about everything related to AI, not just the coding tutorials and stuff, but we're also going to be talking about the philosophy of AI. We have a our AI Renaissance podcast, where we talk about the philosophy of AI and the implications of AI. So if that's something that interests you as well, I highly recommend that you check that out. With that being said, I hope you enjoy, and done.